Gamer Braves.
What's up, guys? This is Juan Emerald from Game Braves, and today we're gonna take a little bit of a step back and talk about something a bit more serious. Chances are, if you grew up in the early 2000s, you've heard some variation of the phrase, video games make you a violent person. Maybe it was from your parents justifying why you couldn't play the new Grand Theft Auto, or maybe it was Bill Clinton discovering Guilty Gear. The point is, video games have always been a scapegoat for violence in the real world, because you get to do things in video games that you couldn't do in the real world without consequences, like perform glory kills. It's bad enough when it's just used by your parents to get you to study more instead of playing video games, but it also has real world consequences. For example, someone in the real world could hurt or possibly even kill a lot of people. And rather than actually do anything about it, a bunch of walking piles of asbestos can go around saying, no, it's the Fortnite. You played the Fortnite and now the fishman is in your brain making you commit a hate crime. Worse still, they'll often pull up studies about this. They'll say like, oh, did you know they actually did a study and it proved that video games do cause violent behavior. So I went around looking for these studies and they don't actually say that. Let's first explain how they do these experiments. For a lot of these experiments, the way they work is that they will show you stimuli. For the sake of simplicity, let's go with photos in this case. And then they'll have you play a game that they themselves have rated violent or non-violent. Then when you look at these stimuli again, you report how you feel. The idea is that if, say for example, I showed you a photo of a guy being punched in the face, before playing the video game you'd be like, that's awful, why would you punch a person in the face? And after you've got, yeah, he probably had it coming. So one of these studies that I looked at from 2008 brings up something that is quoted by the media a lot, which is desensitization. The idea, like I said before, is eventually it just stops being a big deal to you. These kind of findings are what the pearl clutchers love, because they'll love to say things like, by playing Mortal Kombat, now you could watch a real person get sliced in half and go, it's kind of mid. In this Todd Mueller case though, they also reported one more detail, which was what they call oversensitization to aggressive cues. At this point, it's looking pretty bad for video games. Little Timmy picked up Duke Nukem Forever, and now he's listening to Alex Jones while planning his next hate crime. Except by the study's own admission, that's not how that works. We have this thing called causal behavior and correlation. So a lot of this tends to be correlative instead of causal, which is that it's not the thing that causes it. For example, stepping on the gas pedal causes the car to go forward. That is causal behavior, whereas correlation is that whenever my car moves forwards, you can hear the Guilty Gear soundtrack. You wouldn't say that Find Your One Way is what's causing my car to move forward. The causal behavior in this case is my foot on the pedal. According to the study though, it's more of a feedback loop situation. Violent people seek out violent media. The idea is that you're not corrupting a poor soul, is most of these people already had the problem that's causing them to do the bad thing. It just so happens that they also enjoy this other thing. A lot of the naysayers like to play up this whole corruption theory. In the Todd Mueller study, they debunked that. It is still necessary to clarify under what circumstances these effects influence behavior, particularly because cognitive control is involved. Which is nerd speak for video games aren't mind control, you dingus. Now, I know what you're thinking, if you've seen this channel before. This isn't just some guy who regularly makes videos about Yae Miko well actuallying a paper that came out around the same time as Revenge of the Fallen. People much smarter than me have had this exact same opinion. For example, Paul J.C. Adachi and Tina Willoughby in 2009, who published their own paper criticizing this exact type of research. They argue that it's not just violence that can cause these kinds of feelings. You can get pumped from other things, like competitiveness or a demanding pace. That's right, people in 2009 living in either a post or pre-Revenge of the Fallen world managed to predict the kind of rage you would feel when you lose at Tetris 99. Once you consider these factors though, the whole notion that video games cause violent behavior doesn't really hold any more water, since the same experiences people so-called describe when you play violent video games are what you'd experience playing, I don't know, sports or catching your turtle once he's climbed out of his tank. So there's been a lot of dancing around the topic. Todd Mueller says Yesn't? And Adachi says, it's simply not that simple. In comes a paper by Ferguson and Smith, published in the distant year of 2021, back when we thought the pandemic was just going to be a few months of our lives. In this paper, they double down that the relationship between violent people and video games is not what you think. It's actually the other way around. Violent people will in fact search out for more violent media. Because, let's face it, how many of you have been in a bad mood and decided to put on, I don't know, say the Doom soundtrack or something? Heck, there's an entire anime about it. It's called Agretsuko. When you're angry, you want to seek out similar stuff to help you ease the tension. In fact, this paper even goes on to say that it lowers the instances of violent crime for that explicit reason. If I go out and punch a guy on the street, I get arrested. I could do it in GTA though and get $50, which is still not enough to buy anything, but that's because of GTA's terrible economy, which maybe we'll get into in a future video. The whole paper is an interesting read and we'll be sure to include it in the description, but it's basically summed up by this paragraph. Across the countries analyzed in our study, we found that video game use had little relationship with either homicide or suicide. The exception to this was for the log-transformed homicide outcome, wherein video game consumption was inversely related to homicide. It's pretty much the closest thing you are going to get to a smoking gun acquittal, which is a weird analogy to go with, but hey, whatever works. So we've got about 12 years of collective research to prove all these pearl clutches wrong. Just like you ask yourself every morning, you may be thinking to yourself, what's the point? If the old studies were wrong, why did they get echoed so much? Surely your mom, your teachers, and maybe even your youth pastor who really needs to stop trying to sound like a kid, they can't all be wrong, can they? Well, unfortunately they can. And this isn't really a mystery either. This shit was solved in the 70s by what Cohen describes as the moral panic theory. Basically, what the moral panic theory is that when something new comes around that is viewed as a threat to your values, the conservative establishment will always move to make it sound like a bad thing. A lot of time will be spent making it look bad by the media, and they'll always bring out so-called experts to talk about how it needs to stop. Eventually though, if you can weather it, the thing just becomes what Cohen describes as visible, which is just another way of saying as another thing that exists. Remember when people thought Twitter was the end of the world? That's a good example of that. And remember, Cohen wrote this in 1972. That was before even the first Transformers movie was the Stan Bush soundtrack. And yet it's still relevant today. Heck, you can apply it to anything. We're filming this in Malaysia right now, where the phrase "that's not our culture" gets used so much that I could practically say it if they forgot to take the pickles out of my cheeseburger. Of course, it's dangerous to assume that this is a blanket for everything. You could just look at anything you don't like and say, well, that's just moral panic theory. And unfortunately, there's simply no formula to account for that, which leads me to my final point. A common thread in all of this research is the importance of your own ability to think. And that is really important for all this. You need to be able to think about things like, what is causing me to drive to Burger King? Is it the fact that I played Snack King earlier today on the Xbox 360? Or is it because I have a car and therefore can drive to Burger King? Similarly, you could also think things like, hey, that guy who's telling me it's not the guns seems awfully chummy with gun folk. I wonder if that has anything to do with anything. Think about it. Situations are complex. Video games don't make you kill people any more than watching TV shows with representation count as being an ally. For God's sake, some people still think watching a sitcom about cops counts as activism. But you can bet your ass that there definitely is a causation by the amount of people driving to Burger King and how easy it is to get a car. This has been Juan Miller from Game Braves. Feel free to show this video to anyone who still feels like talking about how video games cause violence, because I honestly think this discussion is ready to change. We can move past the, well, studies said it does cause them, because like I said, it doesn't. Take care, guys. Hey there! Thank you so much for watching our videos. Don't forget to give us a subscribe if you'd like to see more, and like so we know what kind of content you want to see. Got suggestions for new content? Let us know in the comments below too. Thank you so much again for watching. Take care, dudes.